Welcome to Telesur. I'm Camila Escalante, and this is Interviews from Quito. On today's program, we'll discuss the massive challenges being faced by the people and government of Ecuador. Today, we'll analyze the latest developments in Ecuador, whose administration has overseen a number of changes within its own government, while also following the path of economic neoliberalization prescribed by the IMF. Long before the pandemic, we began to see layoffs, salary reductions, and vast cuts to the public sector. Even with restrictions, protests have become a daily occurrence. To map out the scenario, we're joined by political analyst Ricardo Restrepo. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you, Camila, and with your viewers.
Let's begin with what's been headlining in the Ecuadorian national news. Lenin Moreno has put forth a short list of names to the Legislative Assembly, which is tasked with approving the president's fourth vice president. That's 4 vice presidents in just 3 years. Why did the vice president resign? And give us a bit of the background on who might come in his place.
Right. So yeah, lots of changes. This is unprecedented, even for Ecuador, to have, at least at the level of vice presidents, this level of rotation and instability, where four vice presidents in one term, one presidential term, which is record breaking. In fact, in a country that has a profound historical record of political instability. Like, just to give you one figure, from the time that Ecuador became an independent state in 1830, there's been a change of the executive every 2.5 years on average. And even within that context, the changing of vice presidents this frequently is a record. It's a marker of profound instability and reconfigurations of the powers that be, behind the executive, behind the legislative, behind the court system, and the rest of the powers in Ecuador. And the former vice president, Otto Sonnenholzner, who basically none of the population at large used to know, they can barely pronounce his name, resigned because he is affiliated with the Partido Social Cristiano, the Social Christian Party, which is a traditional party of Ecuador. It originates in the Conservative Party. It's got bases in mostly the coast, with agro exportation sectors, with the banking sector, in the Sierra, which is the mountainous side, the large land-owning elites. But he was a new name. He was a fresh name that came into office to partake in the Lenin Moreno administration. And now that elections are coming, we should have elections in 2021. They are kind of drawing away from Lenin. So they want to create some kind of separation, some kind of at least appearance of separation from the Lenin administration, which is deeply unpopular in the country. You see single figures even in some of the polls regarding the Lenin administration popularity rate. So they're making new moves to be able to be viable and obtain power in the elections of 2021, with the Partido Social Cristiano at the center of this new vying for power of these traditional factions of Ecuador. And then there's 3 options that the executive presented to the legislative to voice which of them should be the vice president, and it is headed by Maria Paula Romo. Maria Paula Romo portrays herself as kind of the left the supposed real left of the Lenin administration, governing coalition. She comes from Ruptura, a party here that supported the Citizens' Revolution up until 2011, when the Citizens' Revolution promoted a reform of the judicial system here, which was amply known to be heavily corrupt and not independent and very dependent on economic powers and very corrupt judges. So the Citizens' Revolution, backed by the Constitution, which mandated this, and the referendum, went to reform the judicial system. And she said, well, this doesn't protect judicial independence, so we're not going to support this. And she became a relatively prominent opposition member ever since to the Correa administration, and she was immediately taken in by the Lenin Moreno administration, which itself acquired power by basing itself on the popularity of Rafael Correa, and his ticket was one of continuity with the Citizens' Revolution headed by Rafael Correa. But then immediately after he came into power, he immediately turned to the traditional elites and opponents of the transformations that had taken place in the decade of the Citizens' Revolution between 2006 and 2016. And this is a new way of competing for power. So she headed basically the operations as the Minister of Government or Internal Affairs during the October protests, which were heavily repressive of the population, heavily repressive of all manifestation and freedom of expression, and there were tons of doses of political persecution, of aggression and violence against the population, which was manifesting itself against the neoliberal reforms promoted by the IMF, which were projected to increase land 300,000 people into poverty just immediately. With indirect effects, it would be much higher than that. So she was basically with this discourse of being from the left. She's supposedly a feminist. She attacked commanding the police force, which is what that ministry does, heavily the protesters that were exercising their rights and liberties against neoliberal reforms that really cut against the justice system.
Absolutely. So, as you said, Maria Paula Romo, the Interior Minister, has been largely faulted by various groups for the violence and repression against protesters during the 12 or so consecutive days of popular mobilization in Quito and across the country, which we call in English, we're referring to as the October Uprising, in which numerous sectors took to the streets, blocking highways and major roads. And the focal point was, of course, the National Assembly, the area where several people from the indigenous movements were killed by Ecuadorian security forces. So let's go back to the former vice president, Otto Sonnenholzner, as you said. Many of us don't even know how to say his name. A lot of citizens were outraged by photos which appeared online showing a Spanish consultant, Victor Lopez, who had previously been advisor to El Salvador's Nayib Bukele, who had come to Ecuador during the height of the coronavirus crisis here, it seems, in order to consult the former vice president. Now, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that Otto paints himself is beyond politics. So this is the Bukele model. So he's a politico, no politico. He's a politician, not a politician. So He tries to paint himself as somebody who's not involved in what people are really fed up about, which is, these warring factions for power, that don't promote the general welfare of the population and look out for the general interests of the population, but rather cater to their own very fractious and fractured factions. And so people are fed up with that, and the way to kind of try to paint yourself as somewhat attractive and politically viable in the vote is saying, well, I'm beyond that. I am beyond politics. And in fact, that's how he came as a vice president. He was saying, I'm here to bridge the gap between the government and the people. I'm not a politician. And so he's taking that kind of discursive stance, which is, it doesn't have the rhetoric of populism, but it does share this feature of populism, which is to create a direct nexus with the people, which is, I am the people, I am with the people, and I am against the state. But he is the state. He has been the state. And even just a few weeks ago, Sonnenholzner was saying that he would never be a candidate, and that he had no intentions of running for office. And we see this turning around very quickly, and we know what powers are behind him. And as I said before, mostly this is the Partido Social Cristiano, with all the real economic and media powers that are behind him, including some of the most wealthy people from the agro-export sector, the banking sector, and large landowners.
So, our viewers may not recall the details of what even transpired with the previous vice presidents, political prisoner Jorge Glass and Maria Vicuña. Help us recall how they came and went from office.
Sure. So, when the Citizens' Revolution headed by Rafael Correa was trying to select somebody that could keep on the movement, keep the movement going with key policy platforms that were formalized in the program offered to the citizenry for vote in 2016, 2017. There were two basic options to lead this, and this was Lenin Moreno and Jorge Glass. They both had been vice presidents of Rafael Correa. And with internal voting in the primaries, or the analogous of primaries in the Citizens' Revolution, so Lenin Moreno won that decision. So he was the candidate of the Citizens' Revolution, and Jorge Glass became his vice president. And immediately, as Lenin Moreno became a president, he aligned himself with the right. And it's very interesting. This very much corresponds to something that has a history. I mean, Lenin Moreno was part of the Abdallah Bucaram short presidency. Abdallah Bucaram, viewers might not know, was a brief president that Ecuador had, and went out of power back in 1996. He only lasted for a year because he came into power on a populist left message, promising reforms and promising to include large sectors of the population that had been traditionally excluded from the political sphere, social sphere, from the economic sphere. In fact, one of the descriptions of how Ecuador is historically was very much keyed by the former ambassador by the United States in Ecuador like, in a leaked memo uh, that was leaked by WikiLeaks. Linda Jewell, who said that Ecuador was one of the most corrupt and undemocratic countries in the world, with factions that vie for economic and political power in corrupt contracts. And he was part of this administration, everybody saw it as very corrupt because it, had this populist left message, and then it immediately turned to the right. So this was the Partido Roldosista Ecuatoriano, and Lenin Moreno was part of it. And Pablo Celi, which was then positioned in the controller's office, the general controller's office, in charge of investigating corruption in the state, has been used as a tool to really go after political opponents. And after Lenin Moreno made this turn to the right, doing what the PRE had done before once again, and aligning itself with traditional economic elites, including the large bankers, that he publicly said, he's with the bankers, and the bankers expressed their love. And Lenin Moreno said, well, the people I'm really starting to hate now are the people who voted for me, which is the people at large. So he did kind of the same move, and the Comptroller General, who was from the PRE, came in to really go after Jorge Glass. So Jorge Glass was jailed as a vice president, elected, with the same number of votes as Lenin, and he's still in jail. And interestingly enough, we don't have, we have more evidence to suggest, direct economic and political corruption by Lenin with the INA papers than by the former vice president who was jailed. And the people still don't know what exactly is the evidence that is, sufficient to put him to put him in jail.
So a question that a lot of people ask me from the exterior, of course, in the international community, people say, how was this able to happen? How did the Citizens' Revolution and Rafael Correa allow such a thing to happen? How were these right-wing actors able to swoop in and take control of the government, have former Vice President Jorge Glass jailed, and now we're seeing that a number of Correistas have had to leave the country under persecution, and that persecution continues. So can you address some of the critiques that are there any critiques that people have had of what was left here in Ecuador from Rafael Correa and how this was able to take place? Is there not a structure that could serve to fight this sort of political persecution and attack by the right wing?
Yeah, I mean, without justification, I think the explanation is, it has various keys. So one of the keys is that the Citizens' Revolution was a very new movement. So it knew politics by coming into power in a way, headed by Rafael Correa. And it was an open movement because it came to power in 2007 after winning elections in 2006 with this, transformative agenda that was formalized in the 2008 Constitution. And it really mobilized much of the population around these progressive agendas of social justice and inclusion of traditionally marginalized groups, both in terms of ethnicity, women's rights, and class. and large improvements to all these sectors happened during this time. But it was an open movement that really, just allowed everybody to come in. And Lenin Moreno was one of these actors. And, we've seen, a big, chunk of leadership within the Citizens' Revolution kind of betray the movement that actually gave them power the previous decade. And so, it was an open movement, and a movement that said it traded security, the security of knowing, the loyalty and the commitment and the identification with a program, a progressive program, with obtaining power, and obtaining power for certain ends that there was that trade-off of you incorporated a lot of loyal people into that movement. At the same time, during that decade, Ecuador became after heavily being having a concentrating economy, mobilized by the economic policies of neoliberalism, the 3 decades before the Citizens' Revolution. It became one of the countries that most moved towards equality, economic equality, and eradication of poverty, and political inclusion of women, of blacks, of indigenous peoples. So it had, very, very big achievements during those 10 years. But the kind of the real commitment of all its leaders wasn't, I guess, properly vetted, and we see this betrayal and in a way kind of like the house always wins. So we go back to traditional politics of Ecuador, of previous to 2006, and these are some of the actors that are really dominating this sphere right now. Of course, there's another ideological, educational aspect to all this, which is that, of course, how can it be that practically half of voters who voted for Correa and who then voted for Lenin because they believed in Correa, then they've kind of they've been a soft vote, and it's kind of changed and switched, and much of that electorate has gone, even though there's a relatively solid core of about 25% of the electorate. Another 25%, and perhaps a bit more, has really adjusted itself to the traditional ideology that serves the traditional elites right now.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ricardo. Time absolutely flies. Would love to have you again to squeeze in a little bit more about what you were able to squeeze into that last answer on the IMF and neoliberalization. Good to have you.
Great to be with you, Camila. Take care.
We've been talking to Ricardo Restrepo, an analyst on Ecuador's social and political situation. And with luck, we'll have him once again to discuss the pre-election process and what the popular sectors are demanding here in Ecuador. Thank you for joining us on this week's interview from Quito. For Telesur English, I'm Camila Escalante. Until next time.